So now we're ready for session 4, the importance of social economics. And our facilitator for this session is Meaghan Dennison. And just a little bit about Meaghan. She is the Chief Executive Officer of Cape Fear Collective. She was one of the first hires at Cape Fear Collective when it launched in 2019. As the Director of Programs, she oversaw programming and managed relationships with stakeholders. She also led hiring and onboarding of a team that would support community care of Lower Cape Fear by implementing the Health Opportunities Network. Ms. Dennison understands the issues and inequities in the region through her work at Cape Fear Collective and with HOP, and demonstrates an ability to lead and bring communities together. I can attest to the fact that she is a hard worker and a woman with a vision. Let's give an applause for Meaghan Dennison.
All right, good afternoon. Thank you so much for that introduction, Linda. Really appreciate being here today. As Linda said, my name is Meaghan Dennison, recently named CEO of Cape Fear Collective. We're really happy to be here. I'm also privileged to be on the YWCA board. So I'd like to thank Velva and her staff for welcoming me not only on the board, but the invitation to moderate this panel today. The social and economic opportunities we have, such as good schools, stable jobs, strong social networks, are foundational to achieving long and healthy lives. But we know opportunities aren't equally held across communities. Cape Fear Collective recently completed an inclusive economy report, and we found the region's economic indicators, including unemployment and growth, are healthy, but many residents working in low income, low wage opportunities and occupations do not share in the region's success. A tale of two economies, if you will, is rapidly emerging for our region. One near the wealthier coast and a shrinking middle class with decreasing purchasing power farther inland. And this disparity is not only impacting wallets, but health. Families that do not earn a self-sufficient income feel the effects on their mental and physical health. Trade-offs must be made in homes in terms of food or prescriptions, helping with homework, or a second job. Today, we brought together this esteemed panel to discuss these issues and ways in which our community is addressing these inequities. Jim Morton, president of Cape Fear Community College, and our gracious host this afternoon. Brian Jones, a social worker with New Hanover County Public Schools. Dr. Jimmy Chait with Mount Calvary was unable to join us today, but I know he sends his best wishes. Deitre Epps, founder and chief executive officer of Race for Equity, and Mebane, Resilient Communities Officer at NC Partnership for Children. For more information on their backgrounds and experience, I hope you'll reference their bios in your program. Panelists, I also welcome you to share more about yourself and your organization when answering your first question. So one more comment and then I'll hush. But in January 2020, the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services and the NC Institute of Medicine issued Healthy North Carolina 2030 report, which highlighted 21 indicators of the social determinants of health and set 10-year targets for North Carolina's health. We've covered many of those social determinants today, including housing and food insecurities and inequitable health and insurance access. The socioeconomic indicators included in that report highlight individuals below 200% federal poverty level, unemployment, short-term suspensions, incarceration rates, adverse childhood experiences, and third grade reading. Together, these often boil down to wealth and wealth inequity. Deitre, I'd love to start with you. Race for Equity worked with the NC Department of Health and Human Services and NCIOM to help identify these indicators specific to health disparities and outcomes for the Healthy NC 2030 report. Can you share with us why it's so critical to include these socioeconomic indicators when discussing health, and also share more about your work at Race for Equity?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Deitre Epps. I'm the CEO and founder of Race for Equity. We are a global management consulting firm. I live right about 2 hours away in Durham, North Carolina, but I am originally from the state of California. RACE is an acronym that stands for Results Achieved Through Community Engagement. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here today. I briefly want to say I've been a North Carolina resident for 9 years. I moved here from Maryland, where I lived for 20 years, and I was the director for Baltimore's School Readiness Initiative. So early childhood is a passion of mine, and I'm an advocate for early childhood services, and I could go on and on about that, but I'll pause there. I do want to say that as I start off today, we've heard some amazing information. As a global management consulting firm, I have worked in different continents and different states in the country and different continents around the world. And I will say that this is a momentous occasion in our country's history. We are at a pioneering space where every one of us in this room can be considered ambassadors. And I'm inviting you to look at your booklets. If you haven't looked at it yet, please pull it out. I'm going to ask everybody to pause. Please bear with me, but everybody pause and pull out these booklets. If you're still here, if you don't have it out, pull out your booklet. Pull out. It's in your bag. Did you look in your bag? Did you look in your bag? Only special guests. So you get a book, you get a book, you get a book. You can have my book. So I want to tell you what it says. It says, eliminating racism, empowering women. Everybody say, eliminating racism. Eliminating racism. Empowering women. Empowering women. So I'm thrilled to be here today. And I just have to say to you, you can really have my book if you come in, if you want it. You can have it. I want to say to you today that Healthy North Carolina 2030 was launched, and I was asked to help support the selection of results and indicators for that group, that task force, that statewide task force. And I was really happy to see in those 2030 indicators, it talks about systemic racism. So North Carolina was at the front before the federal government decided to address systemic racism at a federal level. North Carolina was really already there. So we can applaud ourselves as a state that we took that first step. I also want to say that inside there are things like mass incarceration, things that when we talk about social determinants of health, we can't ignore the impact of mass incarceration on communities, the impact of mass incarceration on families. Inside those indicators is dropout rates, suspension rates, disproportionality across many areas. So when you're looking at Healthy North Carolina 2030 and using those results and indicators, please don't ignore those disparities. I also want to share, you asked me to talk a little bit about why social determinants of health. The impact of racism should be included in every conversation on social determinants of health, because across housing, across education, across poverty, across health, across every area, racism has impacted well-being. So I'm thrilled to be able to say that from this place today. Finally, I want to share with you that after moving here 9 years ago, I started studying my family history. And I found out, not knowing this, my great-great-grandfather, Sam Corbett, was born in New Hanover. And I had no idea. But I'm here full circle for my ancestors who worked this land, standing in front of you saying eliminating racism and empowering women is a critical part of this work. And I say that from a sincere heart of gratitude for everyone that had the courage to put that on the front of a book. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that opening. Mebane, I'd love to go to you next because we are already talking early childhood and early trauma. Mebane, your work at NC Partnership for Children and previously at the New Hanover County Resiliency Task Force, which I know many in this room participate in and endorse, have addressed and continue to address adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. Can you share with the audience what are ACEs and why are these foundational traumas later important in an individual's overall health?
Thank you. So just a brief background. I have been living I was born in Wilmington, but didn't really grow up here. I moved back here in 1992 and have been working in the nonprofit world ever since. So I've had the privilege of working in multiple nonprofit organizations, from the Domestic Violence Shelter to the Children's Museum, Art Museum, Smart Start. I can usually stay in one place for a short period of time. So I've learned lots of things from the people that I have had the privilege of working with. And some of you in this room, thank you for all you've taught me along that journey of nonprofit work. In 2018, I started through a grant that New Hanover Regional Hospital got. We started the Resiliency Task Force that brought people together from different systems. For so long, we have worked separated from one another without connecting to each other, and it has not allowed us to do our best work. And so the task force was a great place where I learned the power of connection, not just in relationships, but the power of connecting organizations and communities and figuring out together what our solutions were going to be to make our community a more resilient, trauma-informed place. A year ago now, I went to work with the North Carolina Partnership for Children to help communities across the state do something similar. And there are about 45 communities in North Carolina that have some form of multi-sector coalition that is addressing ACEs and resilience, or becoming a trauma-informed, trauma-responsive community that are meeting regularly. Not all of them have paid staff, and we're working to build the capacity of those organizations. I'd like a show of hands for those of you, when somebody says ACEs, I talk about that all the time. I know what that is. If you could raise your hand, it'll help me. So about 2/3 of you. So I'm going to, for those of you who are familiar with this, please forgive me. I'm going to just very briefly tell you about the ACEs study. This has been referred to as the most important study that nobody's ever heard of for quite a long time. We've gotten to a place where a lot of people do know about it. This was a study published in 1998 by two doctors, Dr. Anda and Filetti, who studied almost 18,000 individuals who were primarily white, middle class, who had health insurance. And they asked them questions about their childhood. And they were questions about abuse, neglect, their household, social determinants of health, basically, 10 questions. And for every time someone answered, did this happen to you in your childhood? Every time they answered yes, that was one more point on their ACEs score. And what this study found was that as someone's ACEs score increased, so did the negative health outcomes for those individuals. And for things that you might assume it would increase those scores, like substance abuse, mental health, suicidality, people sort of said, yeah. But what this study also found was that it had a negative impact on things like cancer, diabetes, heart disease, things that we don't associate with negative social childhood experiences. And so there was proof positive that this negative childhood experiences affect health outcomes for the rest of your life. And before I pass the mic, I want to mention 3 other kinds of ACEs that the resilience movement is talking about. So we have adverse childhood experiences. We also are talking about adverse community environments. And those are things that we've talked a lot about today, like racism, lack of affordable housing, lack of upward mobility, food deserts. Those are adverse community environments that can exacerbate or be adverse childhood experiences. There's a third realm of ACEs, adverse climate events. And this community, this region, went through a significant adverse climate event in 2018 with Hurricane Florence. And that was a collective trauma that we all went through together. And finally, the fourth ACE, which we call the atrocious cultural experiences, things like what happened in Wilmington in 1898, things like historic trauma, racism, or slavery, family separation, that there is scientific proof that those traumas that people experienced 400 years ago continue to live in the DNA of individuals living today. That those traumas are passed on from generation to generation and affect the health of our community. So that was a long answer to what our ACE is, but I just wanted to give a quick overview.
Please.
Thank you, Mebane. I just want to say the name for that is epigenetics. In case you're a researcher, epigenetics, EPIGENITCS, epigenetics.
Thank you both so much for that. Couple things struck me by what you said, but I'm reflecting back to Alicia this morning, and that the systems are working exactly as they were designed, and to dismantle those systems, we would have to get out of our silos. So I just want to speak to the work of the resiliency task force and the resiliency work happening across sector and cross systems work. I also can feel the eyes of my data team over here, and that we were thankful to partner with the NC Partnership for Children at Cape Fear Collective, and we do actually have a community adversity index score down to the census tract level available on capefearcollective.org. That individual kind of at-scale measurement of ACEs is obviously a little bit difficult to capture at that scale, but we are trying to dig into the community side of these particularly shared experiences. Gonna move, so adverse childhood experiences, one of the 21 indicators. In the education space, there's also short-term suspensions, third grade reading proficiency. Brian, I'd love to transition to you now through your lens as a social worker at New Hanover County Schools. How are ACEs showing up in the classroom, and also kind of speaking to, why those indicators in particular are so important for health and success in the classroom?
Thank you. I am Brian Jones. I am a school social worker at Murray Middle School. I've been here with New Hanover County Schools, thank you, for 21 years. I am a Wilmingtonian. I went to Carolina Beach Elementary School, graduated from Hoggard High School. I'll leave the middle out. I am from Seabreeze, which is a historically black middle-class neighborhood. Depends on who you talk to. Depends on which family, supposedly, but we won't go there today. Let me just say, for all that has been said so far, it's not church, so let me keep it clinical. The one thing about being a social worker and being trained in social work, and I'm sure many others in here can relate in your fields, is this information, and you have to wait so long for this information to become much more public or accessible to where other people can learn, so that people can finally say, you made that up. And I'll just share a story, 5 seconds, 10 seconds. When I shared things about Wilmington before, when I shared things about Black Wall Street in Tulsa, I remember a history teacher telling me years ago, you made that up, and, until it became on the news. And what I will say is, when I think one of the news stations, I won't say the name, when it ran the story about the history of Wilmington, things of that nature, I'll never forget, so many teachers ran up to me and said, oh my God, you were telling the truth. But to give more credit to that, truth be told, being that I am African American, 47 years running now, raised in Wilmington, half of the stories that was given to us, and I say that for a reason, half of the things that was told to us, we didn't know what the old folks, as we would call them, were exaggerating, but so many different people had so many different versions that still lined up. Unfortunately, I didn't know it was true until I graduated from the I have speech problems, y'all. The very great University of North Carolina, A&T State University. My Black literature teacher brought it to our attention and took a survey. The majority of us in the classroom were from Wilmington, and we never knew that half the stories they told us were real. So I say all that to say, to come in this room and to sit with you all is an honor and a privilege. I was not the original invitee. Dr. LaShawn Smith, who is now retired from from New Hampshire County Schools was, but I am here. So again, I appreciate the opportunity. How are these things arriving in the classroom? Let me just say, with New Hampshire County Schools, by which I am employed, we have several different people from several different fields who work. We are all good and excellent at what we do. As time has gone on, if you're from New Hampshire County, you know that we are at a different place, and then sometimes it seems like the same place. If anybody knows the old saying, and I won't bring up the song by, was it Whitney Houston and Deborah Cox, same script, different cast? But regardless, we are at a different place now where we understand things better. And for that reason, shout out to social workers, is one of the reasons why we are a part of, we're at the table with everyone else in New Hampshire County Schools. With us are our school counselors, because I don't want to get in trouble with my sisters and a few brothers. And we know that these things exist. So we have so many things in place to where we discuss these on different levels, whether it's an MTSS meeting, whether it's a regular parent-teacher conference, whether it's SIT team, on so many different levels, we address this. We do know it exists. However, there still is the need for more professional development. One of the best professional developments that New Hampshire County Schools has ever had, if you all remember, was groundwater training. It was an excellent training that was open to the entire community. It started a trend of understanding and has just brought us to a different place. So we know that these ideas, we know that these theories, we know that this scientific evidence is true. However, it's still not quite yet a part of all professional development. But I do know that as it relates to educators, we are much more aware now than 20 years ago, than 40 years ago, of trauma and its effect. However, we still need that information. We really need the numbers, the data, and we need to know that they not just come from, because I appreciate my sisters here to my left, but I need to see those numbers when they come from the federal government so that I can debunk, yeah, there's not an agenda here. This is real. These are facts.
Yeah, we love data-driven decision making, and I think some of this quantification and really telling the story is hopefully going to push the needle to a different place instead of a same place. That's what I'm going to take with me. So of course, we all know education leads to better jobs, more money, other benefits, including better health insurance, which of course will lead to access to quality health care. Higher earnings also allow workers to afford homes, which we've talked about, and healthier diets, which we've also talked about. Reports point to people with lower levels of education having worse health than those with more education, even when access to care is equalized. Jim, I'll start with you. To your work at Cape Fear Community College as an option for students when they're getting out of the K-12 system, both in terms of degree programs and certificate programs. What is happening here at Cape Fear Community College to drive folks to some of those more sustainable, high-wage jobs when they make it to CFCC?
Thank you. Thank you, Megan. And first of all, since I'm present here, my host, welcome to Cape Fear. I know it's late in the afternoon, but hope you've enjoyed your day here at Cape Fear. And this is one of many events. We have many events here throughout. I was speaking earlier, before COVID, we would have sometimes up to 80 events in a month. But Adelpha, thank you for the invitation and participate today. But I'm Jim Morton, president of Cape Fear, and let's see, I guess it's 4.5 years now being president here, and been here at the college, I guess 6.5 years. Well, with Cape Fear, and I'll say this because a lot of times our biggest struggles with the community colleges, which there's 58 of them in the state, is telling our story. And so some of you may not know, and I had it was a Wilmington Leadership Group yesterday, and I kind of went through, how the college is broken into different sides of the house, if you will. So you have the curriculum side of the house, which mainly focuses on your college transfer, university transfer programs, which means they can come to Cape Fear and get your first 2 years out of the way and earn your associate degree. But in regards to the high schools and our partnership with New Hanover and also Pender County Schools, you can also begin that process in high school and dual enroll, which is a very economical way to get some of those credits out of the way. You actually can finish high school simultaneously earning an associate degree. But there are barriers there. We may discuss that later. But and then you also have CTE, which is a career and technical education, which is more focused on your trades and skills for workforce development. But those are longer term programs, or maybe 1 or 2 year type programs. We also have short term programs, which can be 10 to 12 weeks. Our our funding mostly comes from the university transfer, but in recent years, we've really been focusing on that, of course, but focus on short-term training. There's stats with, I think, in New Hanover County, it's last from Department of Education, it was about 31% of our graduating high school students have no plan at all, no plan. Pender County is about 41%. And so we have been really trying to push, because these students will get out, and our average age of a student here is 25 years of age, but that's because many of them will get out and they kind of flounder around, basically trying to figure out, well, now I'm not making enough money doing what I'm doing, job hopping, and they realize they need to come back for a skill set. So we really try to create listening to business and industry, because we have really focused, just like the other day, we had a group, it was called the Cape Fear Manufacturers Group. They started in May of 2020. It's 30 plus manufacturers have gotten together, and they have kind of come up with ideas of what they need as far as a skill set for employment. And they've come to us, we've hosted them here, and from that, we've designed short-term programs, like 10-week, 12-week programs. The other day was chemical operating, production, and machining, just to get somebody up to a level in a short period of time, like 10 weeks, to get a skill set, and these employers have obligated to interview them, which is a great way for them just to get their foot in the door and then advance from there for a higher paying wage. Another focus we have been working on is apprenticeship programs. And we have the state, I probably started 3.5 years ago, really focused, because there's no better plan to me than someone who's studying in a program, but also to go to work for someone in an apprenticeship situation. So when they finish, they've got the relationship with the employer, and most likely they're going to be hired. So today we have our electrical apprenticeship program. We have 28 employers signed on. We have over 100 students in that program. The other day in this room, we had 22 dealerships, automobile dealerships and garages in town. Had them sign on to be partnerships to give this opportunity to students, because some of these dealerships, they're desperate for help. And it was kind of interesting. Some of my folks were saying, oh, they're satisfied with what they have. And when I'd go out and talk to them, they're desperate. They need folks. And some of these mechanics, they're making $100,000 a year. It's incredible. And so they have signed on and build that pipeline so they can start work. And it's all about that relationship, because I firmly believe we train and we educate, but help facilitate employment. That's a big piece of the puzzle with academics. And that's what we're really focused on. You hear about the shortages due to COVID with you asked what we've been doing lately. Truck driving, and take that as an example. A couple of years ago, we had one class that was running. It's 10 weeks. We shortened it to about 8.5 weeks to get a quicker response time. We also it was just a day class. Now we've opened up a night class, and we have both those are full. So this year alone, we've graduated 223 truck drivers, and these are 8.5 to 9 week programs, depending on if it's day or night. But the starting pay now is between $55,000 and $60,000 for these truck drivers, and a lot of them, there's not overnight travel. They can stay at home and travel. So those are the things and opportunities we're looking at, and we're focused on really the higher paying. If we're going to spend time, let's not spend time training someone to make $10 an hour. Let's focus on making 19, 24, an upper livable wage type incomes. It's like our electrical line worker program, been very successful. And in 10 weeks, you take a student who has a high school diploma and a driver's license, and they can get out and making $24 an hour. And advances up to $70,000, and that changes a generation.
Absolutely. No, formerly actually worked at Duke Energy and helped kind of a group of employers trying to design those programs. And so love to hear that Cape Fear Community College is kind of trying to shorten the time period for those high paying jobs. But I think kind of for all of our panelists, and Mebane, I may start with you to try to connect some of these dots in Deitre, but what are the barriers to even getting your foot in the door to those programs? And in terms of some of what we've talked about here today, knowing that if someone can get their foot in the door and kind of be supported through an 8-week, 10-week program, we're not talking the 2-year curriculum programs, which is also an option, but let's talk about some barriers, and then I'd love for us to kind of end on some opportunities.
Sure. Can I
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm still talking about oh, did she?
Kind of for all panelists.
I get excited
Yeah.
about that. Sorry.
Well, I think I'll start with social-emotional skills that we learn from the day we're born. Some of those skills that are learned in early childhood. I don't know if Krista Turner knows, she's gone, but one of the early childhood, Deitre was talking about that earlier, that those skills are important skills to have when you arrive on a work site, right? So if something happens at work, and it happens all the time, we have good days and we have bad days, and if we don't learn as a young child, either from our family, our caregivers, or our school teachers, our preschool teachers to K-12 teachers, how to handle strong emotions, we're not employable. So the investments we make to make sure that young children have the resources they need to learn, what do you do with sad feelings or angry feelings? And those things are learned by play, and those things are learned by caring caregivers who can give a loving environment, a safe environment for those children to learn those skills. I think that's one thing. Another thing is, and I talked about this a little earlier, we have to have a community that talks to each other. So for example, if there's a incident at a family's home overnight, and law enforcement is at a home, there are communications that can happen between law enforcement and the school to say, hey, you don't have to give the details. This happened in this child's home last night. They might just need a little extra TLC today. But if our law enforcement's not talking to K-12 education, who's not talking to mental health care, who's not talking to business community, we can't share information and become a trauma-informed community where we're all looking out for each other. And that doesn't sound like, quote, education, but it's everything to do with education. That how we are with each other and how we are in classrooms and how we spend time together means everything. So that's, I think, one of the barriers we need to address.
Any other additions on barriers from our panelists?
I want to speak to my fellow panelists mentioned the groundwater with the Racial Equity Institute. I want to speak to that for just a moment, and addressing racism again as one of the social determinants of health. I have been doing the work of advancing equity using a framework called results-based accountability probably since 2003, and in Baltimore City, where I learned directly from, started with the Annie Casey Foundation and then just kind of branched out from there. And I want to say that it wasn't until, and I was working hard in community. I was happy with the work I was doing. I was, was feeling good about it. Worked in various sectors. Early childhood, went on to child welfare, went on to juvenile justice, worked across multiple sectors. It wasn't until I attended a Racial Equity Institute about 5 years ago that I had a gut punch. Because all the work that I had done, when we got to addressing, I work with data-driven decision-making, results-based accountability, right? And I spoke about when we got to racism, when we talked about the story behind the data, when we got to racism, I would, with my good intentions, I would talk about culturally relevant services and providing services to populations in ways that they could respond to them. And when I went to a Racial Equity Institute with Monica Walker and Bay Love, and I realized that when we got to racism and that story behind the data, I shifted the conversation. It still impacts me that I did that for almost 20 years. When we got to racism, we would shift to culturally responsive services. And I still teach on culturally responsive services, but it wasn't until I learned about racism and how for centuries, over 400 years, our country has been basing everything on a social construct called race. And so until I realized that, I had to, Dina Hayes Green, who's like my coach, my mentor, my wow, I want to be just like her kind of person. She said to me, I was crying. I was like, all my work over these 20 years, what was I doing? I was doing good work. How many of you are doing good work? I was doing good work. But I realized until I began to address racism as part of the root cause of the inequities, my grandchildren, yes, I have grandchildren. I have grandsons, twin grandsons, Mike and Carter, and now Lennox. I realized that until I began to address racism, my grandsons could be having the same conversation at my age as I was having with people. And that troubled me. So I shifted the focus of my work and I launched Race for Equity in 2018. And we are explicitly addressing racism as part of the root cause of the inequity. So to answer your question, until we deal with the impact of racism on the people we are working with, and I'm not just talking about Black and brown folks. There is an impact of racism on people who are race identified as white. Have you seen what's happening with the data for people who are race identified as white? Is it good? Are we okay? What's happening with the opioid crisis? Are we okay? What is the life expectation data for people who are race identified as white? Are we okay? So until we begin to address racism as a people, and look across the room, we've got a diverse group of people, different cultures, different backgrounds. Until we can begin to hear one another and to address that root cause, which is racism and the impact of racism on people's well-being, we will continue to get the results that we have. But I am like Harriet Tubman I'm a modern day abolitionist. And I invite you into the cause. I invite you into the movement. So when you see something, say something. When you see something, say something. And I realize my time is going a little long, but what's on this thing?
Perfect.
What does it say?
You're great.
Eliminating racism and empowering women. Did I tell you I liked it?
I mean, what a perfect, I think, conclusion to our panel. I wanted to make sure we had time for questions from the audience, so would love to turn it over at that time for anyone for questions for our panelists.
Can I just add to her what she
Please,
just said real quick?
Yeah.
May I also mention too, there is a term called classism, and this is off script, but classism. Let me want to build a pipeline real quick. We need more mentors. I know that's such a cliche, but it's so true. And when I say mentors, I don't just mean mentors from the church or from the community. I mean mentors from different jobs. To add on to what everyone was saying, and he said some very good things, by the way. One of the things about, even when it comes to Cape Fear and the wonderful things that they're doing for us, we need people to encourage our children to take advantage of those opportunities, whether it's community college or four-year college. And we need to identify our gatekeepers. Now, I'm not trying to start any problems, however. When I refer to gatekeepers, I mean that in every aspect. And those gatekeepers have to be encouraged to recruit differently. They have to be encouraged. So let's take, for example, let's talk about racism. You can't just speak to one Black child because they're from a certain class or a certain home and not the other Black children because they're not aesthetically pleasing to you. So I'm gonna move on because I know that's gonna come back one day. Mentorship and then effective communication. It just has to happen.
No, I'm really glad you brought that up. We had this whole section on wages and workforce, but I think our panelists covered a lot today. As we're waiting for questions from the audience, to your point about mentorship and diverse recruiting, back to the Inclusive Economy Report, economic inequality has actually grown over the last 20 years. Quickly, wages have increased for white workers over the last 20 years and declined by an equal margin for Black workers over the same period. And data shows earnings trajectories from generation to generation are flat or in decline. One driver of this trend is the evolution of the labor market. Again, kind of the premium wages going to those educated, and if there's too many gatekeepers and too many barriers that we've talked about, we can't shift that trajectory. Any questions from our audience? Or Deitre, I know you're working with organizations with a lot of these practices and supporting kind of accountability within organizations. Any tips or feedback you would give to folks in the audience?
I'm happy to address questions as they come up.
So I kind of want to tag on to what Brian said, and I want to say this to you, Jim. Cape Fear Community College is like a community college like I have never seen in my life. My God. This place is, I've never seen anything like it. It gives community colleges a whole new name. But what I will say, with all of the programs that you mentioned that you're doing, I can almost guarantee you, and I don't know this about your program, but unless you have faculty, staff, social workers, people in spaces that look like the people you're trying to bring into those programs, you will not see people come through. So that 400 years that we talk about, that we've experienced racism, gets in your head. And you start believing that that thing is not for you. You do. And I can say that for myself. I was an excellent student. I got into Duke University. Excellent student. I didn't think I could be a doctor, though. That was for someone else. So it gets into your head. It's very effective. It's been a very effective strategy that's been deployed. And once again, parents don't know. They can't help their kids. So you really, in every space, have to foster that level of diversity. It doesn't matter how nice your staff is. If they don't look like the people you're trying to foster through that, kids won't really believe it's for them. So just continue that work in every space.
I'd like to say something in response to that about the data. Race for Equity is a sponsor of a something called the Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Benchmarks. And for organizations like you're referring to right now, for organizations that are trying to think about how do we measure how effective we are at diversity, equity, inclusion, and really belonging. We're really trying to get to a sense of belonging, which is what you're talking about. You didn't have a sense of belonging that I could belong at Duke, right? So global diversity, equity, and inclusion benchmarks give you concrete ways in 15 different categories. We do both organizational development as well as community development. And so these benchmarks look at both, and they give you standards, very specific standards that you can say, are we doing this? Oh, good, that's best practice. It goes from best practices through 5 levels down to being reactive as an organization. So it's a great way to look at how you're doing internally within an organization to measure your success.
Thank you. Oh, got another question?
All right, so this kind of ties into what you guys were just talking about, but I've been noting some of the ideas that have been resonating with me today. Oh, can you hear me now? Is this better? Okay, so we keep returning to the idea that Miss Alicia Rhodes presented to us of a system that intentionally keeps us out and it intentionally fails us. And I think in our conversation right now, we were also talking about the ethnocentric idea or the Eurocentric idea of what success means to us and how it's nonlinear, how it's fragmented, and how it's been impacted in communities of color, especially with things like ACEs that you guys have discussed on this panel. So I guess I was wondering, kind of in the realm of diversity, how do you propose that we teach people confidence? How do we teach people agency in general populations where not only has the system failed them, but they have this idea that the system has to continue to fail them? How do we tell people that that narrative can change even when they're not immersed in a space that we've been so privileged to be immersed in?
I have really been thinking about the idea of hope. And one of the things we talk about in the resilience movement is, instead of asking people, what's wrong with you, say, what happened to you, right? So acknowledging things have happened to people. But also, I was having a conversation with Katricia Bowman yesterday about, and she's working in housing, and she asked a woman she was working with yesterday, would you like to buy this home? And this was a woman who was just recently homeless, who had just moved into a house that was in pretty bad shape. But the question, would you like to buy this home, was very hopeful, right? You can't, like, not, do you think you could? Not, would you like to? Would you like to buy this home? We have to give people the idea that you can do so many things. So I would love what the other panelists might have to say about the idea of hope. When people have hope, they can do so much more.
As an educator, although I am a school social worker, I'm considered an educator because I work inside the school system. I find it very needed that we listen to what our children are saying in passing, in the hallway, in the classroom, and that we learn how to be, someone already used the word, responsive. And it's not that people don't know better. People aren't now always as comfortable. So we need those continuous professional developments. As it relates to Rock Me, which already spoke to what some of the people here have already said in the audience and on the floor, excuse me, in the audience and up here on stage. Rock Me was started 40 years ago because when people were, when agencies were recruiting, there were absolutely no children at that point in time who were African American, but there were really no minorities applying for engineering jobs, including women, regardless of race. There was no women, there weren't any women rather. I forgot y'all, I was at school. So I have to transition to talking proper. I have to use my verbs and everything. I had to do lunch duty. Lunch duty is not that easy. Okay, I'm talking with grown folks. Use verbs, use verbs. Having said that, they started working. They made a pact with New York County Schools, Brunswick County, Pender, Columbus, and Whiteville or Wyville city schools, depending where you're from. The industries, that is, whoever the industries were back then, because you know the names have changed, and they understood, in order to do that, we've got to have a mentorship program inside the school. Having said that, let me just change. I'm a little different from some of the other advisors because, again, I'm not a teacher. I'm a school social worker. So my gift is supposed to be able to know how to talk. And in doing so, I'm constantly surveying children. And what she just spoke to is they don't understand how to connect the dots. They don't have the confidence. I brag on the amount of times I have won at the competition that we go to. And the number one strategy that I use, remember, I'm not a teacher. I can teach you some math. I can tutor you. I can't teach you any math, as my son has to remind me sometimes. But the thing I found out is if I told them how intelligent they were and showed them that some of the things they said were excellent, not shoot them down. And this is actually best practice for teachers, to not tell a child that they're wrong, but tell them you're almost there, things like that, strategies like that. But as I do that, whenever we would go to competitions, Mr. Jones, what if we don't win? And I'll tell y'all a secret, just don't tell anybody. I'll tell them, oh, you're going to win. Winning is not everything. However, y'all better come back with some medals because we done talked the whole year. But you have to break the barriers down and find out rather, what are they comfortable with? Having said that, we are a people, we are a society, we are a people of conversation, we are a people of relationships. And as we establish those and we bring that with being genuine, then you begin to see changes. Having said all that, that is what was needed and that was done. You got to help me with the question again because I don't went too far. But that is how I have worked it with students. And when it relates to all students, black, white, whatever the case may be, in my program or not, when it comes to the programs that Cape Fear is offering, constantly mentioning those things. That's why I say when you have mentorship, we've got to have people at the car lots. We have to have people in the dealerships, rather. We have to have people in the school, but we have to have people on every level. I like to say the terms multi-level and multi-dimensional. If it's not happening in all those arenas, then it's not going to have the positive. It's a wonderful thing on paper. might get you a grant, might get you a news story. I'm not calling anybody out because they're not here today, but that particular person. But you got to have it in every dimension for the kids to finally connect the dots and understand this is for me. It's not limited. It's not just for certain kids. And also to those programs that he is talking about at his school, those programs for our students, I know so many children who are, I use a term because we're talking about socioeconomics, called first generational middle class. So many of our families, because they are so fearful that anything might happen to knock them down, they have taken advantage of those early high schools, those dual enrollments, to give their child an opportunity, because and it's not always what the parents tell me, it's what their children tell me. And I know their parents are so fearful that if their job lays them off, at least my child already has a start to college. They're scared that they can't, and they're too, not full of pride, what's the word? They're too, y'all know, they're too ashamed to say, what if I can't do this for my child? Now, mind you, I work for the school system, and I just told my child in the fall when I bought him a car, no, actually a few months ago when I bought him a car, I said, son, truth be told, my mother sent me to college when she worked at DuPont. I'm a school social worker on a teacher salary, and he was, we didn't do FaceTime. I said, to be honest with you, I just didn't think I had enough money to buy you a car. I said, I never told you that, but I need you to understand that. Now get them grades up.
Clock's ticking. Jim, would you like to add to that?
Just real quick, Brian mentioned, just the other day I was speaking to one of the principals in one of the Pender County schools, and he made that comment that we have to understand there are many students in Pender County, many families that they're the first to graduate from high school, let alone college. And so, that's the barrier that we have. And one of the questions touched on confidence. And that's critically important for people to have confidence. Where does confidence come from? I think it comes from having a well-orchestrated plan to take the doubt of what you're pursuing out of your mind. In that regard, I think we've waited too long to connect with students in high school. We need to start in the middle schools and grammar school. And so we've been doing a push. How nice would it be if someone in the middle school, even grammar school, already knew what they wanted to do, and they enter into we call it a pre-apprenticeship program, say it's nursing or machining, and they have a track that they know when they go to high school what they're going to take, but they know why they're studying. They understand why they're taking math or science, because at the end, when they finish Cape Fear, or if they go to a 4-year track, GE is going to interview them, and we've got a whole pathway laid out for them, and GE's got their logo on it, and they're saying, well, you're going to have a job making $80,000 a year if you pursue this path, and you start in middle school, grammar school, and track through. But it takes all the doubt out of their mind, and that's why I think a lot of times you have mental health issues, because students, they're floundering, they don't know what to do, and they stress themselves thinking, what am I going to do? And to get that kind of plan in place would be tremendous, I think, and help these students. And so that's one. This summer, we're actually having we're calling a career academy. And so we're going to have students from Williston and West Pender here for 2 weeks. And they're middle schoolers. We're going to have bus transportation working with the schools to bus them in here. We're trying to get 300 students on campus. But it's not just a regular, walk by simple tour. We're going to have a program in the morning that they actually spend time with the instructor, do hands-on. We feed them at lunch, and then a program in the afternoon. But over the course of those 2 weeks, they'll be exposed to 20 different programs. So hopefully something will seed with them and create a passion. And we've got some funding to put some liaison in these schools to help keep them on that pathway. So hopefully start early, keep on the pathway to, into the school here to finish with that skill set. But I think that's a big piece we're missing, and we really need to push back. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, rapid fire. Go ahead.
Instead of just looking at mentoring in terms of children, I think we also need to look at in terms of job mentors, because a lot of times, I was just sharing with someone earlier, we get hired on these particular positions, and you might not have a job mentor to help You may be the first person in that particular position, right? And you may feel overwhelmed. You may feel that you don't have someone that you can communicate with so you can navigate and be effective and be impactful to do the things that you do. So I think that when we start talking about employment and social economics, we also need to consider those who are already in the workplace and helping them have mentorship so they can be successful to do the work to help the community. In addition to, we also need to have certain types of parameters where, let's say someone gets a job that they can't be let go for the first year, right? Because typically those are the times when you may make a mistake. So you may get a performance, write-up or things like that. So when you have more job compassion within your employer, that helps people be more successful. That also helps guarantee that that person is going to be more productive and be there for the long term, so you don't have a lot of turnaround on their employees. So that's just something to think about as employers.
No, I love that term, job compassion. I know we're a little bit over, but encourage connection after. I will say too, I think employers are now recognizing that job compassion. Even I know Jim's having a lot of conversations about those guaranteed interviews, apprenticeships, kind of getting involved earlier on. So I do apologize, we're a little bit over. I would regret if I didn't share that these 21 indicators in the Healthy NC 2030 report are now on a Healthy Communities NC dashboard that Cape Fear Collective launched this week, down to the census tract level, all 100 counties, 2,200 census tracts in North Carolina. So we are not the program providers ourselves, but our goal is that this data can help everyone in this room do the work they do, measure impact, and if there's more data you need or you need to make sense of it, please reach out to us at data@capefearcollective.org. And with that, I would love to just thank our panelists for a really wonderful conversation today.